Welcome, everybody. My name is Sherry Weinberg, and I'm the president of the Washington chapter of Physicians for National Health Program. And I'm glad you're all here. Land acknowledgement, which is a little more interesting for me because I just finished reading most of a biography of Chief Seattle, which really illustrates that there were Native American tribes and pieces of tribes and villages and interactions and switchovers and wars and all kinds of stuff throughout this region before white people who were called Bostons. The British were from the Hudson's Bay Company. And they all interacted in here. Anyway, this area has an interesting history that precedes us, white folks who, like me, came out from Boston. So, Dana, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. I'm Dana Iorio. I'm the vice president of the Washington chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program. Since we have such a pretty good turnout, I think we have 20 people on. I think we're going to skip our individual introductions. So Chuck Pennacchio will be our speaker. After he speaks, there will be a discussion and a question and answer period. So with that, I'll pass it on to David, who will be introducing Chuck, a longtime single-payer advocate. Both Chuck and David.
First, I would just want to highlight a couple of events that are coming up in the near future that we all need to know about. So we've got some significant events coming up here. The first one is a webinar. Ed Weisbart, who is really a great speaker and has fabulous slides, is going to be talking about how for-profit entities are trying to take over our Medicare system and destroy traditional Medicare. From what I heard, there's like 250 or 300 people already signed up for this webinar. So it's on the 20th, 5 p.m. our Western time here. So I would highly recommend seeing that. And then another thing coming up, this is going to take place at the Washington State Labor Council office in downtown Seattle. And it's going to be about effort to take over, privatize the VA as well as Medicare. And we've got Susan Gordon and Steve Early, our longtime key people and working against the privatization of the VA system. And we're having our own Andy Wellens, who's on our PNHP Washington board, is a Navy veteran and a VA patient, and he's going to be talking about his experience and how he definitely wants to stop the effort to take over that system. Okay, to introduce Chuck, I was very, very, very nervous that he wasn't going to make it here on time because he was in Oregon this morning, and driving back, he got caught in a traffic jam accident on I-5, and luckily he made it here about a half an hour ahead of time. So he's got the most amazing energy. He's always on the go for working for Healthcare for All. I've known of Chuck for several years, and met him briefly in a conference a few years ago. And for the last several weeks, Chuck has been staying with me here in West Seattle, and I've gotten an up close and personal look at how he is constantly Zooming. I never saw so many people Zooming, a person that has so many Zooms, and he's always working around his missions of radical empathy, radical concern, and radical love to solve all the problems of the universe. I think I left out a couple of radicals in there, Chuck, but you can add them. He's been working for 5 decades as an issue, electoral, and union organizer. To mention a few activities, he founded the One-Payer States that he will tell us about tonight. And I think everybody here should get on the blast from One-Payer States. There's so much to learn there that comes out every day or two. And key people like Kip Sullivan are always posting on there. He's also was a producer of the single payer documentary Fix It, Healthcare at the Tipping Point. He was a 2016 delegate for Bernie Sanders and worked as an aide to 4 U.S. senators and a member of the House. And he even ran for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania in 2006. Don't ask him how many votes he got, but that took a lot of oomph. He has a 32-year history and politics professor at the University of Arts in Philadelphia and other places, and co-author of several books and book chapters. And I've been to several events here in Seattle with Chuck, and I'm just amazed about the breadth of his knowledge about every single thing in history and politics that we need to know about. So without further ado, Chuck, take over.
Hey, thanks, Dave, for the kind introduction. I'm always actually humbled to be in the presence of physicians who are in the fight for single payer. It takes a lot of guts. I mean, it's our moral compass, right? This is who we are and why we do what we do. Your Hippocratic oath, do no harm. The medical industrial complex is doing a hell of a lot of harm, and we have to stop it. We have to reverse it. But just a personal shout out to Dave, who's 2 floors above me here in his house. One of the ones you left out, Dave, was radical hospitality. And I think that's actually where the organizing work needs to begin, is welcoming people without judgment and having conversations and listening intentionally. Something I've learned a lot, from Vicki Lowe. You all know Vicki Lowe out in Sequim, who's the chair of your Universal Health Care Commission here in Washington State. I intend to get out and visit her before leaving town. So it's radical hospitality, it's radical hope. And radical hope is derived really from the movement of Native Americans who were nearly wiped out on this continent. And how do you reconstruct a culture after, in the case of the Cloud Nation, the white tourists, with guns riding on the back of the Iron Horse, the train, the transcontinental train, wipe out their buffalo, practically wipe it out. And how do you rebuild your society? How do you rebuild your culture? So that's radical hope. And radical love is the empathy, the compassion, what brings us together, and why we're here. This is what we need to do. We need to create a civil healthcare system, a healthcare system we can be proud of, and a healthcare system that reflects the better nature of our angels, or the better angels of our nature, I should say, to borrow Lincoln's line. But just a little bit more, just on my personal background, just to kind of fill out the picture. I was pretty heavily radicalized in 1968. I know a lot of you have memories of that pivotal year. I was 8 years old, turning 9, when I think we were horrified about, the massive Tet offensive and the fact that we've been lied to by our government, and Martin Luther King's assassination, of course, and Bobby Kennedy's, and then the completely unpredicted election of Richard Nixon, who at the beginning of the year was a long shot even for the Republican nomination. But we got Nixon, and without Nixon, we don't get to Reagan, and without Reagan, we don't get to W, and without W, we don't get to Trump. And let's be honest here, we also don't get to Clinton and Obama, 2 disappointments in my view, certainly around healthcare. So my life's trajectory has been about, knocking on doors. It's been about meeting people. It's been about working to end the U.S. war in Central America, the MX missile in the 1980s. Dave mentioned I worked for 4 U.S. senators. I was a chauffeur for Senator Alan Cranston, former senator of California, got to meet a lot of interesting people, and then did run for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. But, people after that race, they said, "So, Chuck, I'm sorry you lost." And I said, "What do you mean we lost? I didn't lose. We won. We actually built a statewide movement out of that campaign." Actually, Pennsylvania if you're familiar with it, so many Swarthmore people here, about Pennsylvania. It's caricatured by James Carville, right? It's like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Alabama in the middle, which is not true. I can tell you, it's not true. There are a lot of progressive pockets around the state, but the point is that I ran hard on single payer. I ran hard. Kitty cat, she got into the room, Dave. So I ran hard on that, and I learned what single payer was while running. I mean, one of the first things I did was to put together an issues team so that I would be educated up on all the critical issues that I would need to know as an elected U.S. senator. And so I had people who've been in the movement before me, and I climbed on their shoulders as I'm sitting on your shoulders today, having this conversation. And ultimately, what I want to do is talk about the state-based universal healthcare legislation, but really wrap it within the context of what I call theory of change, how we're going to win. And I always like to ask this question of people: how many of you are here to win single payer? I mean, honestly, are you here to win single payer? I just want to see a show of hands. Because a lot of people, and this is not a put on, because a lot of people I know organize in this space for reasons of catharsis and complaining. And I'm not trying to be in any way critical, but like, have you heard the latest healthcare horror story? Sure. We're familiar with the latest healthcare horror story, but we were supposed to be here to talk about organizing. We were supposed to be here to talk about this legislation. We're supposed to be here to talk about communications and so forth. But almost invariably, the conversations turn to the latest horror in healthcare. And I get it. I understand it. I'm blind in my left eye. I'm a casualty of the medical industrial complex. I could tell you my horror story easily. But I think the reason we're here is we need to figure out a way to win. And how do we win? Well, I ran on federal single payer, right? I ran on national single payer as a U.S. senator. But as an historian, as an organizer, I focused on where do we have the greatest opportunity to win, and that takes me to the state level. But before going any further, what I'd like to do is just ask everybody, if everybody has a handle on the chat, give me a 1 or 2 or a 3 in the chat. Just tap the number 1, 2, or 3. How many people here tonight support the effort to achieve a model universal healthcare system, a single payer healthcare system at the state level? How many are on board with that as a 1? How many are here to learn? You're not sure, you're ambivalent. That's a 2. And how many folks are actually opposed? Because there are folks out there who are opposed to state single payer and think that it's a distraction or whatever set of reasons you have. Okay, so far I'm seeing, well, I'll wait till the tallies fill in here, because this will help kind of steer my comments a little bit. That's why I wanted to poll you very quickly. Oh, Chuck Richards is in the house. Where are you, Chuck? Hey, long time. Gosh, we go back to the Jim McDermott days, right? Good to see you. And Marcia, yeah, it's great to see so many familiar faces. We're organizing work over the years. So I see 1, 2. Did I miss any? Is everybody else as a 1? I think, right?
I'm a 1. My chat doesn't seem to be working.
Okay. So actually, Dana, if you don't mind, I mean, I'm trying to put you on the spot here, but I'd like to know, what are your concerns? What is your ambivalence, if that's a fair way of stating it, about state, before I start the presentation?
Well, I was a member of Healthcare for All Washington, along with Chuck Richards and Sherry Weinberg, and I was very supportive of the state approach to establishing single payer. But I've just been totally disillusioned by what happens in the state. And I see that states, they're going to hit a monetary problem with establishing a single payer program. And they can't print money. They can't generate their own currency. And so it just seems like there's too many obstacles for states to establish a single payer, and you're going to have like 50 different single payer plans in the United States. I mean, it just seems like it's just too overwhelming, and you're going to have different plans, and and it'll give opportunities for other states to do even worse things than single payer, like getting rid of Medicaid and perhaps even Medicare. I don't know. So that's kind of why I'm sort of ambivalent. I do think pushing for a state single payer plan is a good organizing tool, but I think the push should be towards a federal plan.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I appreciate that, and I'll be addressing my comments directly and indirectly to some of those points that you make, because I think
Well, I don't disagree with Dana. I actually don't disagree with Dana on everything he said. Really.
This is who's talking. This is Mindy. Hi,
Yeah.
Mindy. Okay. So you
Hi.
you double down on Dana's concerns.
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Anybody else? Okay. I don't want to, yeah. So let me just open up with just a few comments here, and then let's have some Q&A. I don't want to talk too long, but the point and purpose of the State-Based Universal Health Care Act is, in fact, to address your concerns. That doesn't address all of them. And in fact, everyone I know involved in the state campaigns, I mean, our goal is to create a national healthcare system. I imagine folks are familiar with the model of Canada, where Canada adopted single payer in the province of Saskatchewan, and Canada has a very similar constitution as to ours. And setting aside the fact that our current Supreme Court doesn't seem to care about the Constitution actually encourages states to formulate, to experiment, to provide best models and practices. And that's the history I've taught for the last 32 years. The history of the progressive era, which some of you may know, it started in the city of Milwaukee, then it went statewide, Wisconsin, and then Teddy Roosevelt elevated it to national status before it was destroyed in the process of the First World War, unfortunately, setback. But then the New Deal also, y'all might know, was modeled in Albany, New York, primarily by somebody named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a governor before he was a president. So I encourage folks to just think about our history a little bit and how the most of the social, economic, political reforms in our society have actually taken root first at the municipal level and/or state level. And that's really why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, focused on getting states, and why in particular I'm in the Northwest, because I see Washington and Oregon as the two leading states in the country. I think I see you as closer than any of the others to accomplishing this. And I'm here to help and to applaud you and to provide whatever support I can, which is one reason why in a couple of weeks I'll be leaving the state and heading back to Washington, D.C. to be boots on the ground in support of the release of this legislation, the State-Based Universal Health Care Act. And yeah, taxation's a problem. You don't have an income tax here, and then in Oregon they don't have a sales tax. And so one of the things that the State-Based Universal Health Care legislation is designed to do is to get a waiver from the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, to allow states to engage in creative taxation modeling. So that's actually how we're addressing that question. In addition, the waiver, and I'll go over a little bit point by point, just whip through. We have a couple of handouts for both SBUCA. We call it SBUCA for short. That's now getting wonky on you, right? State-Based Universal Healthcare Act. You're going to hear me just say SBUCA for shorthand. And then ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which is, we need to get a waiver for that because self-insuring large companies are more likely than not to challenge the implementation of a universal healthcare system in the courts. So we want to get a waiver so that doesn't happen. And then we also have a set of waivers in the legislation that would allow us to recapture the dollars that we pay out in the form of Medicare, Medicaid, VA, CHIPS, TRICARE, and so forth, and Indian healthcare funding as well. We have to figure out a way to do this. That's why the conversations with Vicki Lowe are so important as well. But that's the idea, is to get cooperation from the feds, hopefully Congress. But Congress right now is a hot mess, as we know, and the Supreme Court's a hot mess. But we're working on the assumption that we'll be able to get political power aligned so that by the year 2025, when you're hopefully in the process of beginning to implement your universal healthcare system here in Washington, and folks in Oregon are doing the same, and possibly New York, New York's a real possibility, and Californians are chomping at the bit. Who knows what happens in California is another, guessing game, if you will. But, the point is that we're taking on the enemy, and I call the enemy because it is the enemy. That's the medical industrial complex. I call them the four horsemen from hell, right? Who are the four horsemen from hell? Right? It's big insurance, big hospitals, big pharma, and the big medical device industry. So it's important to recognize the arrayed power that they have. Thousands of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I know that pharma has at least 600. So they have 6 for every single member of the U.S. Senate. So they can prepare every meal of the day. They can do the laundry. They can take the dogs for a walk. They can pick up the kids from daycare, whatever. I mean, the power that's arrayed in Washington, D.C. is just monumental, as we all know, right? So that's another reason to be doubling down on the efforts at the state level. In my view, my estimation as somebody who's studied this and practiced this for more than 50 years. I also, just a quick shout out to let's see, I think I covered, yeah. And then the other reason that we're doing this, and I think the point was made, I think you actually made the point. Oh, David, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, a lot of people here are not all that familiar with one pair estates maybe. So I'd like you to talk about the history, where it came from, where it is now, and what the hopes for the future are.
Perfect.
And then talk about the meeting you had with Ro Kanna's people today.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. Thank you for that, David. Very helpful. The context for me, that's, historians work hard on context, and I think it's important to paint the tapestry upon which we're planting our flag here for state-based universal health care. But before I forget, a shout out to the previous co-sponsors of this legislation: Jim McDermott, Seattle, somebody named Pramila Jayapal, who's the first co-sponsor of the legislation, by the way. She is proud of this legislation, fiercely proud of it. And if you've heard her in public discussions, she talks about it still as her bill. So that's very important. And our good friend David Loud is always talking about the importance, as I think you all have highlighted, a couple of you, Dana, is that this is important for movement organizing. We're educating state legislators who are going to become national legislators or federal legislators someday, most of them. That's where they come from. And so we want to educate them at the state level and let them understand, what is single payer, how does it work, why is it important, and so forth. I don't have to tell any of you why single payer is important. But that's a very important piece. And of course, education, mobilization, moving people to the effort. And getting people practiced at the art of lobbying as well, going to Olympia, going to Salem and other state capitals. That's rich practice and education, lobbying. It really is important. And the most powerful lobby days I've ever been a part of in Harrisburg, where I did most of my work, was the days that we brought in medical students. It makes me a little bit verklempt when I think about this, because when those folks show up in their white coats and the Republican legislator is standing before them, they're not just seeing a person lobbying for a piece of legislation. They're seeing somebody who may be their children's and their grandchildren's physician. So that's always been the most powerful lobby day, actually, that I've been a part of. And I've been thrilled to work with physicians, both early in their career, mid-career, as well as, most of the folks we do end up working with are retired, because it's complicated to be practicing while you're practicing politics while you're doing your work at home. So let me just make a mention then of one pair of states, where it comes from. It really was an idea that I was the executive director of Healthcare for All Pennsylvania, and I was one of the first people to call for doing economic studies. I wanted to see an economic impact study, because most of the people I talked to in Harrisburg were Republicans, and I needed to make sure that we had a lock solid argument for the fiscal position of single payer and why it's actually the most fiscally responsible. And so what I did is I reached out to other folks, and I connected with people in California and Maryland. So it was Pennsylvania, California, and Maryland were the starting point for one pair states. And we pulled together an effort. We put together a PDF, not a PDF, an RFP, excuse me, to do an economic study. And out of that, we began to ask about other states that might be interested in this. And lo and behold, we've landed today up to 22 states. We have 22 states that are active with one pair of states. One pair of states started in late 2009, early 2010. And it started, right as Obamacare, the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, the ACA was being debated at the same time that single payer was kicked out of the room. Max Baucus kicked out, folks who wanted to have single payer discussed. Since the president-elect, as you remember, Barack Obama, when he ran for president, he was elected and he said, I want folks in the month of December, before I come into office, I want you all to go back to your town halls and your churches and your synagogues and what have you, and have this conversation. You tell me what you want me to do on healthcare. Do you recall that? That's what Obama asked people to do. And the League of Women Voters was the lead organizer in our area. And lo and behold, 55% of Americans across the country said, absolutely, we want single payer. And the next thing you know, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and Barack Obama say single payer is off the table. We're not going to talk about it. So completely disingenuous. That's probably the deepest disappointment I actually had from Barack Obama. But remember what happened in mid-September. After during that election, there was the Wall Street meltdown, and Barack Obama's campaign had been built largely on small donor contributions. But after it became clear that Obama was going to get elected, all of the big industry money came pouring into his coffers, and he kicked out his shadow cabinet, which contained a number of progressives like Robert Reich, and he brought in Tim Geithner, and put together the horrible cabinet. 22 out of 23 of his cabinet members were from Wall Street. He was already starting to pay dividends there. So this backstory, but it's important to remind ourselves of where it came from and what it reflects about our politics today. So I guess the thing about one pair of states that's so important is that we had phone calls for 9 years, like once every 2 weeks or a month, depending on what was happening. And we simply shared ideas and we built up morale and supported one another. And we would have conferences about every other year. And then 5 years ago, we reorganized ourselves as a C4 organization. And then we organized ourselves even further by creating work groups. So we have a policy work group. We have education, advocacy, outreach, organization and development. And I invite folks to participate with us. It's very powerful work. And it's important that we get representation from as many places as possible. So you're invited to participate with us at any level. But yeah, the work of one pair of states, I think, is indispensable. And we're the only organization of our kind. And the last thing I'll say about one pair of states before switching back over to the state-based universal health care and just touching on the key points, opening it up for questions, is simply to say that if we don't change the way we're doing things politically, we are not going to win. And what do I mean by that? We have got to be intentional in reaching to younger people. And PNHP is doing a good job with that, with medical students. And I'm really proud of the fact that you're doing that. Dave and I attended a great event over at UW a couple weeks ago. I love that. But you know what happens in medical school? I mean, the students have the availability maybe the first, second year, and then they get slammed. And then we lose a lot of them. We need to be intentional in connecting to younger people in all walks of life. So we're doing, one pair of states has been hosting a series of conferences. They're intergenerational, but they're not just intergenerational. They're cross-race, cross-class, cross-creed or non-religion, geography. And so this has got to be, in my mind, the organizing model that's going to create the winning strategy. And it's also intersectional. We also need, in my view, we can't just see the world through the prism of healthcare justice. We have to see it through the prism of health justice, right? Social determinants of health. And what that means is we need to join forces with people who are seeking housing, right? Housing justice, food access, right? Food security, quality education, environment, climate, public financing of elections, policing. I mean, truly, you don't have to, it should not be overwhelming. You don't have to think about, I can't do all that work, Chuck. That's too overwhelming to me. No, you don't have to do it all, but to embrace everyone as a co-equal in an effort to achieve justice in their own realm. Because if we welcome people in their own space, according to their own terms of what's most important, because if you don't have a roof over your head, there's not a whole lot more you can do with your life. So that's what we're doing, is we're connecting all these justice campaigns, and we're connecting ourselves again across all demographic divides. And we're bringing this conversation into the space of the pro-democracy movement and the anti-fascist movement. And why do I say anti-fascist? I put a link in the box here because we need to understand that the medical industrial complex is actually part of the state corporatist model that is one of the three cornerstones of fascism. State corporatism, right, is the merger of state and corporate power. And we need to see that that's part of the problem. We have to see that fusion of power. The other two cornerstones, many of you know, are religious nationalism and white nationalism, at least in the American context. So check out my websites. That's where I'm doing a lot of work. It's all complementary. It's all intended to build and connect and make sure that we're doing the work that we're doing. So getting back then to the state-based universal health care, the reason I'm doing it is, and the reason we're doing it is because it fits the strategy. It fits the strategy. It fits the global strategy that I've introduced to you, that I've painted for you as best I can in a short time, the context for the conversation. The meeting, Dave, you wanted to know about with Ro Kanna. It's really an amazing relationship that we've been able to cultivate. If you don't know Ro Kanna, he's the U.S. rep from California 17. He represents part of the East Bay and part of the Silicon Valley. I think it's the wealthiest district in the country. And Ro Kanna, if you don't know, was Bernie's point person. He was his #1 surrogate, and he chaired Bernie's presidential campaign in 2020. Ro Kanna. Ro Kanna was born in Bucks County in 1976, and he was educated at University of Chicago, taught at Stanford, and he beat Mike Honda in a Democratic primary. He ran against him twice, and when he won, a lot of people were fearful he was going to be another neoliberal corporate Democrat. Turns out he's not. Turns out he's a really, really powerful member. He's a climber. He's very ambitious. And you'll find out more because he's planning to run for president in 2028. And I'm going to help him. And if Biden doesn't run, and if Sanders doesn't run for whatever reason in 24, Ro Kanna's in. So we're working with somebody who's a climber, who's very ambitious, and he really wants to push this bill, and he wants to push it hard. And we need to educate members up as to what it contains and why we're doing what we're doing and why these enabling powers are so important to model. And they'll make the lift that much easier for, addressing Dana and Mindy's concerns. So that's why we're doing this legislation. And we had a very good, the relationship with his healthcare LA is amazing. We have 15 people who are part of that delegation representing 8-9 states right now. And we're going to want to get every member of Congress that we can, starting with the 27 who signed on with the bill 2 years ago, and then build out with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, of which Pramila is chair. And remember, Pramila is going to come on again as the first co-sponsor of this legislation. That's how strongly she feels about it. And then we'll proceed from that point. So let me just pull up these documents real quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I'm just going to rip through it very quickly, and I'll happily share them with you. They're not finalized, so kind of keep them in-house. We're going to make brochures out of them, but I'll give you a chance to look at them, and you can correspond with me. I'll drop my email in the box here and invite you into the circle of one pair states. And just a shout out, David helped to put this document together along with Sam Metz, who's the PNHP president in Oregon. Charlie Swanson is the head of the Oregon Healthcare for All Oregon C4. And then some of you might know Chris Curry out in Spokane. Chris is part of our team as well. So this is the talking points for why the State-Based Universal Health Care Act. It's the value. It's going to elevate the value of single payer as health. It's going to provide value for single payer and provide the healthcare financing format to move forward. It'll provide, as you know, I mean, this is the argument for single payer. Of course, dramatic reduction in billing. This is the argument for single payer. No other financing form in the U.S. offers any such advantage. So we're pushing for single payer just at the state level at this point, and also regional. There's a collaboration going on between Washington and Oregon, and we want to elevate that as well because you have some border issues and labor issues. Some folks live in one state and shop in another or work in another, that kind of thing. So we need to have some conversations across the border. So this is the argument, working single payer examples. Yeah, you know, how it's risen to national level by being modeled, you know, at the state level or this has happened in a number of countries around the world. States are taking the lead. It's not why don't states take the lead, but right now the states are taking the lead, especially given the fact of, you know, the reality of Citizens United in Washington, D.C. and the opposition to single payer by President Biden. You know, we have to figure out a way to get this done. So this is our argument here that state single payer can provide this model for what it is that we seek. So here are the federal programs that we want to tap into to provide the funding. You know, Medicare I mentioned before. And we want them, and there are guardrails, by the way, built around this. Some people say, oh, if you do state single payer, it's going to be block granted and the money's not going to go to healthcare. No, it's an absolute mandate of the legislation that the guardrails be built around this, that Medicare is in place. People aren't going to lose Medicare. In fact, what single payer is going to do is it's going to provide, you know, parts C, D, and E that are currently lacking from traditional Medicare. At the same time, we're working with Bernie Sanders to beef up and to make sure that parts A and B are provided for or restored to their traditional place. So I mentioned earlier, we don't want to be stuck in the courts by these self-insuring companies who and they'll want to sue because they currently have a business advantage. Yeah, the federal employee health plans, TRICARE, and then I mentioned to you before an IRS waiver that we're looking for. And if the legislative route doesn't work, we could actually seek waivers through Health and Human Services or the Labor Department or the Labor Department. That's a little problematic because that would be executive level, and once the executive changes out, potentially those waivers would be sunsetted by another election. So we want to get this done through Congress. What needs to be done? The state-based single-payer plan needs these waivers. Again, we don't want them time-limited. We want them indefinite. We don't want them revocable. So this is why we want to make sure that we get the legislation done, so that we don't have problems with the agencies. The legislation is designed to cover at least 95% of the state population. That's a bar. That's the bottom line. I mean, the states have to, if they're going to take the waivers, they have to get to at least 95% of the state population. All patients previously covered will enjoy those benefits plus the enhancements of coverage that wraps around so that they have complete comprehensive coverage from cradle to grave. And part of the requirement here is that the federal debt not be increased. So in summary, state-based universal health care, it provides a simplified process that permits states to legally pool current federal, state, and private healthcare spending into a single state-based single-payer fund. So that, in a nutshell, is the legislation. The bill is being rewritten right now, but you can take a look at the last iteration. It's HR 3775. And then let me just throw up the ERISA document, and then we'll open it up for questions. So this handout that we'll email around to folks. I'll just go through real quickly the definition of ERISA. So this is, again, ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. This is very, very, very important for Washington, in particular, Washington State. This law allows states to regulate products health insurance companies sell, but forbids state legislatures from regulating what healthcare insurance that business purchases for their employees. A waiver would allow us to get around that idea of ERISA. So hopefully that's straightforward and clear. And then the handout goes into a little bit more detail about ERISA and why this is a challenge and why it's important that we get this legislation. This is built into the bill itself. And in fact, we're talking to Bernie Sanders already in the Senate about holding hearings on ERISA because his HELP committee he chairs, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, is the committee of jurisdiction on ERISA. So we're counting on him to give us a hearing. And we're right now in search of a U.S. senator to run the companion bill in the U.S. Senate, where the Democrats do have a majority, And we do have the prospect of getting hearings and potentially votes in the Senate. The House is in Republican hands right now. We're not likely to get much done there in all reality this session. That's why we're pointing toward 2025, but we have a lot of work to get done in terms of educating folks around this. Yeah, so in any case, I'm not going to, here's just a summary statement here. ERISA places legal obstacles in the path of state-based single-payer healthcare. Avoiding ERISA invalidation requires meticulous state legislation, new enabling federal legislation, or both. And this is all based on, everything's documented. Everything we've done here has been researched. This is a research paper that was put together by two lawyers who were advising the Oregon Healthcare Task Force as to why the ERISA legislation is critical and why we need that. So let me stop sharing and we can open it up for however you want to roll on questions, comments, anything.
Lots of food for thought there. Pretty compelling presentation, Chuck. So Merle, go ahead. You're first in line.
Hi, Merle.
I believe a lot of us have heard me rant on about how ERISA or the waivers don't really necessarily have to be sought after, being that we do have a universal healthcare system. Excuse me. In the sense of Healthy San Francisco, we also have a very similar program in LA and New York to what Healthy San Francisco is. But I'm not going to belabor that. But the thing I'm interested in telling you of is I gathered over 3,000 signatures, 1/3 of a minimum that were needed for a whole Washington state universal healthcare trust that we were going to try to get on the ballot for this year. And I was wondering if you had heard anything about that, or do you know much about the initiative 1471 that we had in the state?
A little bit in that Catherine Lewandowski is our treasurer at One Pair of States, and she's also an officer with Whole Washington. She's a nurse in Arlington. So I get occasional updates from her, but if you want to fill us in here a little bit more, that's welcome. If you can just do so very briefly.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. We did not succeed. We did have this as a third attempt at getting it onto our ballot. In our state, you can do a variety of different kind of ballots. This was one that was going to, if it was approved, was going to go to the legislature and set them loose on trying to put together a trust. We needed 405,000 signatures, which was 150,000 more than the previous initiative that we had. And it was fairly well impossible. Our standard for how we're set to see how many signatures that we need was based upon what the governor's participation rate is when he's running. And he happened to be running when Donald Trump was running as well. And so we had a lot of people who weighed in on that particular initiative. So it was not surprising that we failed in our effort. But what we're doing right now, and if you go to Whole Washington, you can actually participate like in even our board meetings. It's very complex and enduring into 2023. And one possible task we were going to try to do is to move into what's one of the possibilities was what Healthy San Francisco is, which would be to institute a kind of a universal health care here in Seattle or in the King County, which is our metro area, so to speak. And right now we're kind of in deliberation on that. But in any case, we've been attempting in this organization, Whole Washington, for a number of years, and they've had Gerald Friedman be the one who contributed the language to the initiative. And I welcome you reading that language. It's pretty very sound production that he's come up with. We paid for it.
Yeah, why don't you drop a link in the chat there, Merle? David Loud.
Yes, thank you. You said something earlier that I think some people may have misunderstood, and I want to offer a correction if they
Please.
did, and that is Ro Kanna's bill and Pramila Jayapal's before him and Jim McDermott's before them explicitly left aside and intact the federal VA system and its funding and the federal Indian Health Service and its funding.
Right.
The proposal does not, it is not proposed to incorporate those into the state plan. The idea is that all state residents would be eligible to use the state plan, but beneficiaries of the Indian Health Service and the VA could continue to use those systems, which would be left intact.
Thank you for that clarification. I did step in, and that's why I'm glad you're here, David. So thank you. Does everybody get that? Yeah. So those are two funding stream exemptions, but that the state bill is designed to wrap around all healthcare needs. So people do have the option of engaging with the state system, in addition to or instead of. Is that Mindy? Your hand is up.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to comment that I really do hope that Ro Kanna ends up making a strong statement for bodily autonomy for anybody.
Yeah, I do too.
I know you don't want to talk about it, but that's my opinion. Pretty strong opinion.
Yeah. It's a debate basically between what we all want and what we think we can get past, and in our political environment at this point. And so the argument to keep it out is that we need to look at this as an economic bill, a bill focused on economics. I'm not taking a side here. I'm just giving you the arguments that the bill is not, should not be designed to bring in other social change issues, I guess. So the question is, what is the purpose of the bill? Do we want it to be a messaging bill? Do we want it to be a bill that might attract potentially a Republican or two, so that we can say it's bipartisan, and that it doesn't become, a big target for the right wing. But, I think, the argument can be made and should be made that, it's about time that people stop running away from these issues and embraced specifically, the attacks on women's lives, and the attack in particular on the trans community. That is really, that's where, we all know that's where DeSantis is going. He gave a speech in which he said the word woke, I think 25 times the other day in Davenport, Iowa. So we know the culture wars is the way that the Republicans are going forward, because they don't have any constructive ideas for how to build a better society. They just have ideas about how they can divide and conquer. And that's just a personal aside. But so I in principle, I agree with you. The question is, what are the goals of the legislation? So that's sort of the
Well, I guess I just feel that it just seems to me such a fundamental human right to have bodily autonomy.
Yes.
I can't pick that as anything else. I mean, it's like, excuse me, hello, you're going to tell somebody what to do? And I mean, it's just nuts. And I guess I don't think we need to be on the defensive about it. I think I guess, anyway, it's just completely outrageous to me that this is happening.
Well,
this restriction.
Right. But I mean, the bill goes that step further and says that we shouldn't talk about the bill until it's final. So we'll continue that conversation later.
Anyway, yeah, I'm just expressing my opinion. You don't have to comment. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mindy. Dana.
Yeah, I'd like to know, Chuck, what political strategies that a lot of states are proposing,
right,
to initiate to get their plans in place. I know Washington has the whole Washington plan, which is an initiative. They fail on a ballot initiative, but I think they're on a legislative initiative now, which I don't think they got enough signatures for that too. But California came the closest what, about 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And they had supermajority Democrats in both the House and their Senate. And they had a governor who basically won his election supporting single payer health care. And when push came to shove and the bill came up for a vote in their legislature, it was just voted down. It was just, there was one senator, I believe, or maybe it was the House guy, who just totally nixed it, even though he supported it initially. And so how are you going to prevent things like this from happening in other states as well, where, you know, there just doesn't seem to be the fervor or the commitment to establishing these plans amongst the politicians
Well,
on the state
California,
level.
yeah, I mean, California, I think somebody used the word behemoth earlier. It is the medical industrial complex in its largest form among any state in the country. And everybody knows that if California gets over the finish line, that's a game changer. You know, that's going to change the entire country. I mean, what, California is like 5th, 6th, or 7th economy in the world standalone.
Right.
It's monstrous. And that what that means is that the lobbying power in Sacramento is not all that dissimilar from Washington, D.C., but it's not comparable to Olympia and Salem. And so that's why I'm here in the Northwest. I mean, I'm voting with my feet. I'm here because I see you all. And the healthcare commission down there only had the 15 members of their healthcare commission, only 3 of them are pro single payer. 3. That's not the case in Oregon and Washington, where you have majority pro single payer people on both commissions, both the task force in Oregon and here in Washington. So, you know, the idea here is that we only need to break out with one state or 2 states or 3 states. I mean, that, you know, similar Canada with 10 provinces. All we needed, you know, we needed Tommy Douglas. We need somebody who's going to, you know, just lead that charge, be a courageous politician. You know, the Democrats voted for single payer when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor in many cases because they knew he was going to veto it. It's an easy vote, so you can go back to your constituents. So, you know, I've you know, I've told you before, shared with you before that I worked on the inside, you know, for 4 U.S. senators and a U.S. House member, and I know the calculation of these folks, you know, and money. You know, money talks, bullshit walks. You know, there's so much money in California. That's the California problem. The problem in Vermont, so which a lot of people cite, or even Colorado, some of these other initiatives that get on the ballot. I mean, you know, a lot of it is just not strategically planned out well. Yeah, their resources are arrayed against us in many places. But, you know, the more fights you have, the more chances you have to win. I mean, that's my theory of change. And it also resonates with our history. But, you know, politics in the United States, it's a money game. It's Moneyball, unfortunately. So I don't know how satisfactory that answer is for you. But, you know, we just keep slamming at it. I mean, I've been at this for 5 decades. Many of you have been not single payer, but social justice work for 5 decades. We don't give up. I'm doing this for my kids and my grandkids. You know, I want to make sure that they have a decent society, you know, to look to, and a healthcare system that reflects the best of you know, the best of America, the best of who we are. So, yeah, politics is a hot mess right now, and but you know, I'm determined. Like I said, radical hope. That's how I operate. That's how I wake up every morning and punch above my weight. So thanks for your comment, Dana. Sherry, and then Scott.
Yes. Sorry, I have 2 comments that are not exactly related. The first one is that it's my impression that the failure in Vermont happened primarily because it was going to be funded by a payroll tax that was going to slam small businesses, and the beneficiary was going to be the state government, which was paying for state health, you know, healthcare for the state employees, and that they would benefit. And it was whereas small businesses were paying 0, and we're going to have to pay like 10% or so payroll tax, and that generated a huge negative wave, because Vermont is a state full of small businesses.
Right.
That's just the impression I had about Vermont, but also I think that when it comes to California, I think also what killed it was the anticipated cost in billions and billions of dollars, partly because of the size of California, and it was going to swamp the state's budget, which has requirements that certain amount of its budget has to be spent on education. And you can't suddenly swamp that with taxes for healthcare. Anyway,
Yeah, no, there are several hurdles in California. We could I could talk about California for a half an hour here, but I mean, taxpayers are going to have to vote to tax themselves, and that's a tall order.
Exactly.
Yeah. In Vermont, I mean, there are other problems in Vermont as well. I mean, it's a tiny state, 600,000 people. It's the size of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I raised my kids. It's too small. And the fact that they didn't pursue these waivers, what we're doing, they didn't pursue the waivers was a huge mistake. And then Governor Shumlin returned to the governor's mansion after a negotiation because he didn't get a majority vote in the election preceding the anticipated introduction of single payer. So there were a lot of complications there.
Right.
But again, I'm here in the Northwest because I believe you have the best shot in the country, Washington and Oregon. I really do. That's why I'm here. And I want to build relationships with people and get to know everybody as well as I can and carry your story back to Washington, D.C. and make sure that folks are paying attention to the smarter Washington.
Okay, my second comment is completely different. In 1993, Washington State passed the Health Security Act of '93, which was going to set up a universal mandatory purchase of policies that were going to be vetted by the state. But one of the problems was, what do you do with ERISA? And the thought that we had at the time was that you simply, you're going to have to set up an employer payroll tax to pay for the state system. And so you simply tell the employers, that's fine, but you're going to have to pay the tax for the common good. And it has to be framed as for the common good. And if you want to pay more, if you want to pay double to privately insure your employees, go ahead. But the idea is that once you get your plan going and they're paying the payroll tax to the state, they're going to lose interest rapidly in continuing a private plan for their employees, and it will just die its own death. And that is a way to get around ERISA without having to seek a waiver. So I ran that past somebody, we're talking about 92 when we were working on this legislation. I ran it past somebody who then was on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as a curbstone. And she thought that was a reasonable argument that could work, but that's all I got. I mean, it's just a curbstone of one judge who has since gone the way of where we will all be eventually.
And I will say something about the Ninth District Court is it's by far the most liberal court in the country at that district level. And if this gets challenged to the U.S. Supreme Court, which it may, I think we're going to see a different outcome. Just to say, we've got 6 Federalist Society judges on our U.S. Supreme Court, and they've been trained to think that corporations are people, right? And that corporations actually are first-class citizens. Look in the mirror. We're all second-class citizens next to corporations, all of us. And for Black and brown people, they're third class, right? So let's keep it real. Scott?
Maybe this is either you can take this philosophically or argumentatively or actually practically, but anything being done to win over people of conservative viewpoints or Republicans, I look at the single payer and it feels to me as a person with progressive politics and as a physician, but I think there's also actually many angles of single payer healthcare that would appeal to conservative as well. And, and I think this group, we're probably all approaching it from a similar angle. I just wonder if there's any chance, maybe this is idealistic too, but any chance that appealing to other groups with a better chance of actually getting something back.
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, Scott, we need to engage with the business community, right, and make the economic argument. Is that where you were going? To win over people in the middle? Is that what I was hearing you say?
I wasn't making a point, so I'm asking a question. For example, I kind of live in Central Washington, where there's maybe less progressives by the numbers, and so yeah, like if I was going to go to my neighbor and have them sign this petition for single payer healthcare, make the argument for the conservative next door, or in general, I'm curious to hear if any thought is being given to that in any of your one payer state initiatives.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's what the Fix It film is centered on. If you haven't seen it, it's fixithealthcare.com. It's up on YouTube. Let me see. If you just do a Google search, I'll just see if I can type it real quick here. Fix It Healthcare. And then just take it and do a YouTube search. So it's Fix It Healthcare, I believe it's .com. And then it's an hour long, and it makes the economic argument. I made this film with Wendell Potter. Some of you might know Wendell Potter, the insurance industry whistleblower. I recruited him to the project. Richard Master, who's a business owner in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. And it solidly makes the fiscally responsible argument for single payer. Absolutely. It takes the burden off of businesses. And in fact, the title of our legislation in Pennsylvania that we used, and we're finally going to go back to it. When I stepped away as executive director, somebody had the bright idea of saying, let's just call it the Pennsylvania Healthcare Plan. Well, the title of the legislation previously was the Family and Business Health Security Act, which is check those boxes. We're looking after families and businesses and your health security, right? Why throw out something vanilla like the Pennsylvania Healthcare? So language matters, absolutely. And I spent 2/3 of my time talking to Republicans. I'll share with anybody who wants it a PowerPoint that I developed with conservative talking points. I think Ed Weisbart's done some great stuff too over at PNHP. But the thing is that this is a burden on businesses. It absolutely is. And that this is why the big businesses like the Boeings of the world, they don't want single payer because they have a competitive advantage by self-insuring against smaller companies, the smaller manufacturing companies, right? Those are the companies that are going to try to challenge over ERISA in the courts. So, the big business community, and the problem too, culturally, is that a lot of the folks in the small business community imagine that they're the same as every other business, like we're part of the same culture. No, the big businesses are actually at war with you. They're trying to crush you. Don't you get it? That consolidation of wealth inequality in this country is not an accident. And the healthcare system perpetuates that, makes it even worse. So, the simplicity, you can appeal to people on the basis of simplicity, efficiency, cost savings, reduction in bureaucracy. I mean, all those are great talking points. And I'll give me your email and I'll send you some stuff if you want to do that. I'll give you my email and then people can correspond with me. And I'll happily share with you what I've got. Just tell me what you want and I'll get it for you. We have a really good communications work group project that we've run for like 4 years. And I'm telling you, people in the single payer movement go to one payer states to take a look at our our stuff all the time. cpennacchio@gmail.com. So there's so much that can be done here, and we'd love to share what we learn. We're open source. Hey,
it's Andy, board member of the Seattle PNHP chapter.
Hey, Andy.
I'm glad to hear you promoting the state approach. And I guess I just wanted to kind of chime in to get the facts straight, because I was part of SB562, which was the California initiative in 2017. And we were actually flipping Senate votes. Initially, it was a bunch of no's. It was pretty democratic. And what killed it then was this guy named Anthony Rendon, who on a Friday afternoon at 5, when no one was looking, shelved the bill. And his reasoning, I'll spare you guys the details, you can look it up. But I mean, his reasoning didn't make any sense. He was like, oh, this is woefully incomplete, and I'm not going to do a darn thing to fix it. And he just ran, and then he just killed it. It was the most undemocratic thing. So anybody who brings up like SB562 from 2017, that is exactly why it's it was very undemocratic in how that, and then when it came up again, because you always get like 2 shots, he just shelved the bill again. And that was Anthony Rendon, and it was just, and a lot of people on the inside said that Governor Jerry Brown told him to do that because he didn't want to, he had to be the fall guy. So I mean, that's the short and long of that. But we were changing minds. We were a lot of state senators who might have been no's or maybes. We made them yeses. So I mean, who knows? Maybe California can do it. But, and my understanding with Vermont is that after they passed it all, the big pharma, like, they just ganged up on Vermont, and they like doubled the price of everything and whatnot, and made it almost, and that's how they, and one other thing too I want to mention, because Sherry said the thing about the costs with SB562. SB562 would have actually saved, it would have made taxes go up, but the cost of it was cheaper because it was projected. They did a Ron Friedman study or whatever, I can't remember Dr. Friedman's first name. They did a study with that and the and another panel, and if that bill had passed in 2017, it was going to be cheaper for Californians, and it would have insured everybody.
It's Gerald Freeman.
Oh, Gerald Freeman. But what I'm correcting you on, Sherry, is that you said that it was going to be more expensive for everybody. It was actually going to be cheaper because it was projected to be about 400 billion at the projected at the rate they were going, and if had they passed it, it actually would have been a net savings for people in California. Not a big surprise. But with Vermont, correct me, Chuck, isn't it that they it didn't really pass in Vermont because didn't Big Pharma and everything, they like double the price of everything to make it economically unfeasible?
I'm gonna just say I don't know. I don't have anybody here knows more detail about the Vermont campaign. I mean, I know a lot about it, but I can't speak with any authority to that particular point. I just don't. I don't know, or I don't recall. But you know, it's a complicated thing, and I know that the Vermont Workers Center folks, they stomped on the Capitol, and really they just it got really ugly. And then in the aftermath of AB 1400 last year being pulled out from California, Oshkara, the California nurses got very upset. And I mean, this is one of the things that we've got to be really, really, really careful about, burning bridges and attacking people, because in the end, we're going to need all the people, and another reason why it's important for me to be working actually with the national single payer folks, like many of you know, Ann Malino. I mean, part of our strategy needs to be how we treat each other. And yeah, we get pissed at people in the moment, but, keep your fire, keep your powder dry. I mean, that's my principle. I get excited, I get angry, but I keep it to myself. I'm not, telling anybody anything you don't know, but there are times we get really frustrated and really angry because people are dying. I mean, that's the reality of the situation, and we're upset, and I get that. But in any case, thanks, Andy. Let's see. Up next is Marcia, and then Mindy.
Yes, hi, Chuck. Thanks for being here and speaking to us about the history and the problems going forward.
And you've been a big part of it. You've been a big part of it, Marcia. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Chuck. Well, I got involved, some years ago, about the same time that Obama, the fiasco about the Affordable Care Act was going on, and I was not too happy about that outcome either, the Max Baucus thing. Blah. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about now, though, is all these problems that like California has had and Vermont has had. They make a step forward and then they don't get all the way, or they get somewhere and then they have to step back. I think it really points out the importance of Washington's own Universal Healthcare Commission. And I think we would be remiss not to mention that in this Zoom call, because most of us live in Washington and would be affected by this. So I appreciate your emphasis on the State-Based Universal Healthcare Act, because we need it in Washington. We need it for the funding of this plan that will be developed eventually based on if we can get a good funding plan. So I just want to give a shout out to OPS, One Payer States, for their website and all the resources that are there, and all the work that you do there, and your Zoom and meetings that you do. But I also want to give a shout out to Healthcare for All Washington's website, because we have recaps of the Universal Healthcare Commission's past meetings, and now some on the Financial Technical Advisory Committee. And I just, if you're really interested in how policy gets made, it's really interesting to tune in and tune into the meetings themselves and to also read the recaps that we post on our website. I'll put a link in the chat there here in a minute. But just to say that the vicissitudes in the political system really beg for having getting this conversation going with a wide variety of stakeholders. There is one conservative member on the commission who has actually participated quite well and is ready to, he's ready to let loose, and soon he will be able to speak up more because in the conversations that they have, because they've been very tightly controlled by the consultants up until now, but they should become more interesting. And so if you're interested, please do check out the link I'm going to put in chat. And thanks again, everybody, for being here tonight and interested in this discussion. And thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks so much, Marcia. Yeah, and again for the great work that you're doing. And what is the estimate of the? So it's not simply getting the money right from these healthcare streams, but it's creating the efficiency of funding, getting as close to a single payer system as possible. David mentioned the Indian Health Services and the VA as sort of carve outs, but it's the efficiency, the bureaucratic efficiency of not having to chase around any number of bureaucrats. That's what makes the system right now just a hot mess. It adds anywhere from 15 to 30%, depending on the estimates that you're looking at of the actual cost of healthcare. Is just the bureaucratic grind and the wasted time where medical professionals are spending so much time trying to chase down payments, both for their practices and their businesses, as well as for their patients. And that's just insane, absolutely insane. You go on to check out the Fix It Healthcare site when we went north to Canada, and it's like, they submit their bills and they're done in like 20 seconds. And then they get the check in the mail or the deposit in the bank within 2 weeks. Done. It's done. I mean, that's the importance of single payer is its efficiency. And that's why we want to get as many of these funding streams to merge into as highly efficient a system as possible. That's where you save the money to be able to provide comprehensive universal health. You know that. It's simpler at the national level. You're right. I mean, I don't deny that, Dana and Mindy. We want that. We absolutely do. But right now, the national picture just doesn't look very good. So let's grind away. Let's get this thing done in Washington. I think I talked to Vicki and she said, if all the pieces fall in place, 2025 could be the year when you begin implementation. That'd be awesome. And I think Oregon is on a similar track.
My hand is up again because I wanted to bring up something we've gotten close to but haven't talked about, and that is rural healthcare. Rural healthcare in our country is really suffering because it doesn't make money. And so all the folks who are into making money want to put extra hospitals and clinics and all of that in cities and suburban areas where the money is. And there's nothing in rural areas, and rural hospitals are closing because they simply can't pay their bills. And I think a good way to look at this is to look at how Canada handles it. I mean, Canada's rural areas are even more rural and more spread out than our US rural areas. But if we could use that to help sell the idea of a single payer system where it's the responsibility of the system to see to it that that the facilities are there for everybody, and how it would work to take some of this excess of wealth out of the central cities and suburbs and use it to have decent rural health care. And how does Canada do it? These are all useful things that I think you might be able to make use of.
Thank you for that, Sherry. And I'm going to give you, since we're in the shout out mode, I'm going to give a shout out to an organization I consult with. It's called the Center for Common Ground, and it's a Black-led organization. I consult, I provide, I've been doing politics a long time, so I provide a lot of education materials behind the scenes. But we focus on nine southern states that are 40 40 to 60% BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous, people of color. A lot of people just have this picture in their head that all of rural America is white. It's not. And these communities are suffering just as much, right? These communities of color in the South. So it whipped around from Virginia to Texas and a few states on the inside there. So it's 9 states we focus on, but rural communities by and large have just been neglected. I mean, I don't want to get into politics too much, but I mean, the fact that rural communities were lit up with rural electrification. And also there's a rural Bill of Rights document that this brilliant state Senate candidate ran on last cycle in Pennsylvania, which includes, I think, single payer is either 1 or 2 on that list. But it's broadband, it's schools, it's infrastructure, it's jobs. I mean, all these things are interconnected, right? It's not just healthcare. But yeah, you make a really good point. And we do need to focus on these communities. They're neglected, they're neglected, they're neglected. And then they end up voting for, cultural issues as opposed and vote against their own economic issues. And that's problematic. So but any thoughts you have, any ideas, any specifics, drop me a note, any talking points or links or what have you. You have my website or my email address. David, you have something.
Yes, I do. Just to piggyback on what Sherry said, and then you said, you earlier said, Chuck, that the best argument for single payer is economic. I want to say equally important is social equity, both in terms of urban rural, in terms of BIPOC, and the healthcare deserts, so to speak, are not only in rural areas, they're in urban areas that are predominantly marginalized populations. And so that's an illustration of the importance of something you talked about earlier, and that is that this movement for universal health care for single payer also has to be fully intersectional with the movements for justice in racial justice, gender justice, geographic justice, and so on and so on. So I just want to say equity is as powerful an argument for single payer as economics.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we in this circle, we use the shorthand single payer. We know what we're talking about. We're talking about, the comprehensive system, but I mean, single payer technically is only talking about the funding side of it. That's why I encourage folks, to use the terminology universal healthcare or even Medicare for all. Because anyway, yeah, but David, you're absolutely right. I mean, social equity has got to be a strong point of emphasis, and we're thrilled that we have a strong champion as we do in Ro Kanna and Pramila Jayapal. So that's that. These are folks who are real leaders.
I just want to say that included in that has to be women's rights to bodily autonomy. It's like, how more basic can you get?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was out in the streets in Pittsburgh when the Dobbs document leaked out. Remember that when it leaked out, it had prematurely. I mean, I was out there. I was one of the older people out in the streets, but I was out there. That's what we need to do. We need to show up too, right? That's part of our organizing and our strategy. It's, we can talk all we want, but we have to show up for people. When folks are picketing, we need to show up and support them. Labor rights. We have to get labor more deeply committed and involved in what we're doing here. Young people, women, the LGBTQ communities, and so forth. So 100%, Mindy. Yeah, thank you. Did we move the needle at all tonight? Are you feeling a little more positive, Dana and Mindy? Any questions that I did not answer well or effectively, or you still kind of ambivalent? I'd like to know, sort of a before and after. Dave, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something here. This has been a pretty intense discussion. And last night I was at Pramila Jayapal's town hall in Seattle and had the opportunity to ask her afterwards about whether she will reintroduce her 1976 Improved Medicare for All bill that she had in the last session, but hasn't been introduced this time. And she says she definitely plans to do that, and she's made 2 or 3 changes to the 1976. But she's wanting to coordinate this with Bernie Sanders putting his bill in the Senate around the same time. So I asked her if it was hopefully going to be in the next month or so, and she just said she couldn't say that. But she does plan to reintroduce it this session rather than waiting till 2024.
Right, yeah, the first year of the 2-year session, right, yeah. And part of what we're doing with Ro Kanna's bill is making sure that when we introduce our bill that we create a wide berth, you know, for Pramila introducing her bill, because we don't want people to see these bills in any way other than complementary, because in fact they are. I mean, Pramila will tell you that. So yeah, I know that they want to coordinate with Sanders, but you know, we're you know, there's lots of rumor mills that are churning out there, and Bernie has said publicly that there's some question as to whether he will be introducing his Senate bill this session. I don't know if folks have heard that. And we're trying to get to the bottom of that to see if we can understand, you know, what because he's deeply concerned about the radical privatization of Medicare. You all are familiar with that, right? ACO REACH, DCEs, all that stuff that's going on. And he's indicated that he wants to concentrate most of his fire on that effort to reverse the radical privatization of Medicare, because if Medicare disappears, and it's been under assault. It's been under attack since 1965. Let's keep it real, right? Let's understand what these industries are about. There's $1.6 trillion on the table, and they want all of it. You know, enough is never enough. They want it all. And it is all about the money for these people, these sociopaths who run these companies.
Yeah, in answer to your question, am I more positive about? I'm very positive about the energy that people are displaying, especially in this room, but elsewhere as well, on the streets and on the ground. I'm very unpositive or negative about the whole political aspects of what we're trying to accomplish, and how we always seem to be playing defense. We're always fighting against things like ACO REACH, or cutbacking Medicare, or cutbacking Medicaid as well. It's just all the cutbacks that we end up fighting against. Now we have this big banking thing that we're all worried about, and the economy probably is going to tank. We're always fighting defense, and that's what gets me disappointed. Not so much the energy that I see in the room, though, or with you, or with your presentation. That was very positive. I feel very positive about that, but we just don't seem to be moving. I've been working on single payer healthcare for 35 years. I just don't see much progress, and it's very disconcerting. So that's where I'm coming from right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And you know, I think I had a real advantage being a college professor for 32 years. So I was getting older while my students were staying the same age, right? And I always would say to my students that, you know, and I talked to a lot of older activists. And this is something I learned very clearly when I was running for U.S. Senate, is that a lot of people hold tight to their cynicism and conflate cynicism with wisdom, or cynicism with sophistication. But cynicism to me actually is a disease. And I encourage people to push back against it. I'm an agnostic. I question everything. And I'm not happy. I'm probably more mad about this stuff than you are. I'm just going to wager Dana for a minute. But you know, that's why I very intentionally commit myself every day to this notion of radical thinking, radical hospitality, radical hope, and radical love. If we're not all in, then we're just part way. You know, it's like, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that. And then it becomes sort of grudge work. And I think that if we can change our mindset, that really is a big difference. That makes a big difference. I know it has for me. And it's been very humbling, because I'm going to say that after 45 years of organizing during the pandemic, I said, I'm going to take advantage of this moment when I can talk to anybody I want on Zoom. I'm, you know, one of the fortunate 80% who have broadband and have a computer. Keep in mind that the majority of the BIPOC community does not. Unfortunately, they're the 20% primarily, and rural white folks too, who are poor. But I guess the point is that I just reached out to friends I hadn't talked to in years, and I got together a Sunday strategy group, and we just started having conversations. And out of that came Justice for All. It came this concept. It's like, let's go all in with everything. And it doesn't mean we have to do everything, but it means that we need to see ourselves interconnected. All these issues are interconnected. In my view, they're all of equal value, and that's how we need to go forward, in my opinion. But so after 45 years, having to revisit the fact that I was tactical for 45 years. Sure, I helped to win Senate campaigns and House campaigns and issue campaigns. We stopped the MX missile with Ronald Reagan. We shut down the intervention in Central America and a host of other issues where we won. But in the big picture, where are we as a society? And that's
Right.
why I have to say that I think it's important not to be fearful of the fascism that we're close to, but to use it as empowering, because it's knowledge, it's understanding, and it's seeing what happened on January 6, 2021 as the first step in an ongoing coup. This is an ongoing coup. That's where we are. That's the life that we're living right now. And to neglect that, I think, is really, we can't. We have to see it for what it is. And then we can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to take it on, and not allow it to sort of wash over us and overwhelm us, but actually to say, I see it now, I understand it, and the medical industrial complex is complicit, and they're fundamentally part of the problem. And that's, we have to see the work that we're doing in healthcare justice is connected to all other justice campaigns, and to see them as connected to us. And then I think we build this then we build the power, and then we build the strategy, and then we win. So what was it? Is it Gandhi? What did Gandhi say about where first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then you win, right? So you never know when the turn's going to come, right? Who could have predicted same-sex marriage 20 years ago, or marijuana recreational and legalization? I don't think anybody predicted that coming, but it did happen. So I think we have to embrace the victories we do have, embrace each other, and then I think we go forward. Supporting it, we support the national effort for single payer, we support regional efforts, we support state efforts, and we support local efforts. Wherever the ball is in play, wherever there's an opportunity, we're part of the game. That's where we go. So thank you all for being here and participating and being such a wonderful and giving audience. Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you again to Chuck, and welcome to staying for a while in Western Washington. I'm sure that David is a wonderful host.
He's awesome. He's amazing, really. And he didn't pay me to say that either. So, he's a good model for radical hospitality. I'm living on a Social Security check. I don't mind telling you.
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of support that we all need going forward. So it's really, really important that we embrace each other. So thank you, David, and thank you, everyone, and thanks for your comment.
Thank you. This was like encouraging comments at the end there. I like that. Thank you.
Yes.
You never know when it's going to turn around, because the majority is with us.
I think we all know each other a little better now, and we can reach out with things that we have.
Right. So thank you, everybody. The 13 of us who are still here, I hope you had a good time with this session. We certainly had a wonderful speaker, and we will see you next month. David, do we know what we're doing next month?
Nope, we have a board meeting on Sunday. But
yes, we do have a board meeting on Sunday.
Just wanted to remind people that hopefully by Friday we'll have this whole thing up on YouTube, editing out all the dirty remarks and stuff. That Chuck has a real foul mouth, right?
Yeah. Well, Dave, will I give you the documents and you can send them out to the listserv? Is that the way you want to do it? Would that work?
That would work.
Usually I write what's called a monthly a meeting and monthly report, where I put some documents and stuff that may have been discussed in the meeting, or other things that need to be available for people for the rest of the month.
Yeah. So I'm talking about like the Sabuca talking points and the ERISA talking points.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll share that with you, and then you can send it out. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
All righty.
Okay, everybody. I'm going to go serve my husband.
A radical good night. Have a radical good night.